Okay, welcome back everybody to the Jiu Jitsu Mindset. My name is Pete Deely, and I'm here with my professor and partner in crime, Lucas Hubo. Professor, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Peter. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing well. We added a new T-shirt to the Jiu Jitsu Mindset
There you
site,
go.
the jiu-jitsu-mindset.com, targeted to old dogs like myself. So it's the over 40 Ugly Combat Club. So go check that out. And we have connected with after Julian Torres's interview with We Defy. And so we're going to talk a little
Yes,
more about that in the future. So for those of you familiar with them, they often encourage and support veterans, often veterans with disabilities,
absolutely.
to help them train jiu-jitsu. So we'll be excited to talk more about that in the future, and we're really happy to make that connection. Well, Professor Lucas, we have Professor John Renken with us today, and
Yes,
uh,
really excited.
he was humble in his description as we were heading into this. He's been an MMA fighter, but those years were a little bit ago, and he's been a successful entrepreneur since those days in a bunch of different areas. And so that notion that we like to talk about, lessons learned on the mat apply to lessons learned off the mat. Professor John is someone I think who can talk really well about ways in which those experiences apply to his life outside
For
the ring,
sure.
off the mat.
That's
Professor
awesome. Professor
Professor
John,
John,
welcome.
welcome.
Thanks, guys.
Really excited to have you here today and to have some good conversation. And like Peter was saying, like how we're going to introduce him. And John, Professor John was like, you guys, you know what? We only have an hour. Just say my name and we go from there.
Yeah, we just go from there, man.
Well, Professor John, we're as we talked about like places to start and lessons that you've learned, things that be interesting for you to convey to the folks listening. I was looking at sort of your career and the different things you've done, and one of the things that interests me is the change that must happen from when you were training jujitsu and other fighting, where it's um, in the context of real safety, like the tapping is your absolute confidence, you're safe in that regard. Um, then training for a time in which you don't really have a training partner, you're fighting. Like, so as you were an MMA fighter, could you talk a little bit about like that journey from when, okay, you might have been in a street fight or something that it was an analogy to an MMA match, but I feel like the MMA experience is a little hard for people to understand because
Sure.
I think when we're a spectator, it looks like one thing, but I
Yeah.
think when you're in there, I think it's an entirely different thing.
Yeah.
Everyone has a
Well,
plan until you get punched in the face, right?
yeah. Yeah. So, it's kind of interesting. I'm a good deal older than Professor Lucas. I'm not 18. So, um, when I started doing MMA, Jiu-Jitsu was very not known. I mean, Hoist had just won the first couple of UFCs.
Mhm.
And actually, my jiu-jitsu instructor was a blue belt. So first Americans are absolutely
Yeah, yeah.
spoiled to death now.
Uh-huh.
That's right.
We have great
Absolutely.
people all across the country, and when I was starting out, I mean, the most that you really saw was a blue belt, right? So, and I actually had my first 10 fights doing judo. I was at a judo school that really focused heavily on grappling. It's not the same as jujitsu, but
Mhm.
it's roughly the same.
Yeah.
Um, jujitsu is better just because they do more of that, right?
Mhm.
But I had enough grappling that I became known as a grappler and a jujitsu guy, even though I wasn't training jujitsu for my first, I think, 5, 10 fights, whatever it was.
Uh-huh.
Um, as a matter of fact, I was learning off videos, watching Pride and Valley Tudo videos and Pancrase videos for leg locks because nobody was doing them in the US. So, and then when I moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, I started training with Greg Nelson, who's under Pedro Sauer, is black belt and had a great MMA program. Brad Kohler, Dave Monet, some of the really great old school guys, and that's when I really started doing jujitsu. And so when I talk about jiu-jitsu, one of the things that I love about it is for safety, it's the closest you can get to reality without actually being reality with the chance of injury, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then even then, if I have a trusted guy that we could do some stuff together that pushes that envelope and we could still be pretty safe, right? So when I was teaching combatives for the Army, which is fundamentally jiu-jitsu, and we would do stuff like closed fist to the body at 30-40% strength, open hand to the face, right? So the great thing about that training model is that you can really push the envelope and get as close to you can to an MMA fight without it being an MMA fight. And that's the best way to prepare for reality and safety.
Right.
Yeah, sure, you can't bite, and you can't eye gouge, and you can't. But if I would take a jiu-jitsu guy over anybody that can bite and eye gouge, because
Right.
I can negate those things in the appropriate context where that's kind of something I have to be concerned about. So, for me, it's the realistic training, and it's not a kata, it's not a form, it's not
Sure.
This joint. I'm going to do this move, you're going to do this move. It's no, I'm not letting you do that move. So if you do it, it's got to be right, because otherwise it's not going to work. So that experience, I think, is really valuable in every aspect. Being able to push the envelope and get as close to reality as you can, but still having a level of safety and trust and the ability to work out, and especially as we get older. So
right.
So John,
really important.
Talk a little bit of our background. Well, I believe you were talking about like mid-90s, right? When you start do your fights and everything. So you started doing the MMA fights before actually started doing jiu-jitsu. That's what I understood, right?
Yeah.
And so until jiu-jitsu came to your life, your judo background was your only background, or you already had some striking?
So I did Thai boxing and Taekwondo. I did Taekwondo first, and then I started playing judo. And then I was in the Army in 1993 through 96, and we had pit fights where we would compete against each other, which was mostly high school wrestlers. But I was already playing jiu-jitsu and doing judo. In judo, they call it newaza, the grappling component of judo.
Yes.
So I was really heavily into the newaza side, and then I saw my first UFC, and I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And so I started getting really good at chokes and arm bars, and then I started watching Pancras videos and playing with the dirty jiu-jitsu, the leg locks, and and so. But I initially came out of a Taekwondo background and then started adding Thai boxing, judo, and then when I got to Minnesota, started doing jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, so MMA fights, amateur, right? MMA or professional MMA fights.
They were all pro back
then. In US or mid-90s, if it was not UFC, it was probably like Fight Club, right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
It really was. And there was many a night that I just showed up at an event that had fights going and said, I'm here to fight. And they said, okay, sign this waiver. And then I would get in there. And I fought in the days where there was no weight classes. So some of my opponents were 330 pounds and I was 165.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So that psychological transition, you had been a soldier, right? So the notion of violence as non-theoretical, as like lethal potentially, a danger being present in it, was kind of in who you were as a person. As you start this MMA journey, I would, like that's a part of your experience. But that moving from fighting in training and then fighting for, in a professional context, what's that journey feel like? Because you're one thing to receive a punch at 30% and to kind of train up. It's also, I think, a psychological shift to deliver a punch at full force without the anxiety of, whatever anxieties might accompany being that violent, so to speak.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. So first of all, I don't think jiu-jitsu, MMA, Thai boxing, any of it, boxing is violent at all.
Okay.
No more than I think that football is not violent. And here's why. So the root word of violence means to violate one's rights.
Okay.
And this is not a violation of anyone. We enter this willingly against one another, knowing that we're here to not just win. That's important. but we're here to test ourselves against somebody as good as us.
Right.
And I think if you really boil down jiu-jitsu to its purest element, it's about self-improvement. It's about knowing yourself.
Yes.
You can't really know yourself unless you're tested against somebody else who knows what you know.
Yes.
And so for me, it was never about violence. It was never even a thought. To me, it was just a sport like any other sport I'd done my whole life. Right.
Right.
Now, as far as the mindset goes, there was nothing more exciting to me than when they closed that cage. Like the idea that there was nobody else to blame, there was nobody else to have excuses for. That cage shut, and it was me and you, and it was going to be a test to find out who was the best.
Yeah.
And sometimes I lost, sometimes I won, sometimes I got titles, sometimes I lost titles. And but for me, it was always about testing myself.
Yeah.
Like, and the thrill of that hunt. I never worried about getting punched in the face. I was the guy because, I trained in an old school judo school. So you didn't tap to chokes. Like if you tapped to chokes, everybody made fun of you because you were not like doing what you were supposed to do. And so like I was raised in the martial arts world in an environment where you choke me, I'm going to sleep. As a matter of fact, when I got promoted to third degree black belt in judo, there was a jiu-jitsu guy there, and I was probably a purple belt in jiu-jitsu at this time, but he was a collegiate wrestler, and he was a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and he was a second or third degree in judo as well. This guy was freaking amazing.
Right.
And I am not kidding you. He choked me unconscious 5 times with a baseball choke from underneath, from the guard, every time I passed. And I kept going unconscious, and he finally threw me off of him, and he's like, "Yo, bro, what the hell is wrong with you?" And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Just tap." I go, "If I tap, I can't figure out what counter works."
Right.
Like, I'm not doing this because I enjoy getting choked unconscious. I want to make sure nobody else chokes me this way. So I would try different counters every time. And, but that's just the way I was raised. So getting punched in the face, I never even really thought about it. Like, it was just like, hey, man, we're coming to do battle. And I never had that issue.
Right.
Do you feel that, well, that's your mindset, right? And I truly believe like a lot of MMA fighters and fighters in general, they have the same mindset. And I agree 100% when you're saying that it's about your improvement. But can be a little bit easier for some people. They lost maybe their temper as the fight goes, and and getting punched or something like that. Do you ever felt that someone that you were fighting, they were like changing, they're shifting a little bit their mindset because things were not going on their way, and they kind of like let go all their values and technique, and like, now I'm just like going to fight you. You know what I mean?
I had one fight. He's a great guy, but in this fight, it was pretty clear that I was far outskilling him. And I don't think that he intentionally broke the rules. And I'll talk about one who did.
Okay.
But I was fighting Scott Hensey for the title at Hook and Shoot. I had him in a Kimura, which became my leg locks, and Kimuras were my signatures. And I think he panicked because it was in front of his home crowd. There was 3,000 people there, and he literally dove out of the ring and knocked me out. I don't think that he intentionally did it. I think it was the panic of the moment that he was done.
Right.
Now, I fought another guy. I fought 2 guys in Texas. This was both unlimited weight class. So Rangel was 250, 260. And then I forget what the other guy's name was now, but he was a Mexican lucha libre guy. And he was biting and eye gouging, and he was doing
Oh, my goodness.
I came out of the match. I had a huge bite mark on my neck, and I had scratches around my eyes. And again, I think that as long as you know that that's at play, jiu-jitsu gives you the tools to make that not a big deal. So yeah, I had one guy that I feel like knew he was well out of his league, and so he resorted to dirty stuff to try and win. I mean, at one point he had taken off his sweatband. He had sweatbands on his wrist and was trying to do a modified choke with a sweatband around my throat. You know, and a horrible referee, Tito Ortiz, who wouldn't disqualify him. And I got,
oh, really? It was Tito Ortiz the referee?
Yeah, I got in Tito's face. I was like, dude, you're a piece of shit, ref. Like,
Oh
what
my
the hell
gosh,
is wrong
yeah.
with you? The guy, look, I have a bite mark on my neck. I have
Oh my
gouge
God.
marks around my eyes. The guy's choking me with his wristbands, and you're not doing anything.
This is out of a movie, these experiences. I mean,
I've had a few of those because you got to remember I fought in the 90s. So, you know.
Yeah.
This is the Wild West of, I mean, do you,
Yeah.
as you've watched things progress over the years, I mean, how does it look to your eye today? I mean, do those look like bare knuckle fights in the early 1900s compared to like boxing in the 1960s with Muhammad Ali, like that type of distance? Or does it look like, well, this is a softer experience because, well, you wouldn't get your throat bit out, you know?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's
Well,
softer.
I say that with a little bit of, tongue in cheek.
I think that it's more professional. I think that they're training at an Olympic level now. However, there's so much money involved now that what I've seen is, and you can tell which guys don't care about the paycheck. We've lost the notion of I'm here just to fight. And now it's about a paycheck because you're doing Olympic level training, so you have to protect the asset. And I think that, when you look at the guys, you just look at whether you like him or you hate him, Dustin Poirier or Conor McGregor, whether they win or lose, you're in for a fight. Like it's a dog fight, right?
Right.
You look at, Sean Strickland now, whether he's the best champion ever or not, it doesn't matter. He comes to fight. Yeah. Like he's just going to throw and throw and throw and throw. And I think that we as a sport have lost that across the board, even though there are a few that are still that way. But I think that comes with the territory when you start talking about multi-million-dollar contracts for fighters, right? Because you've got to protect the investment, and the investment is your body. So, I definitely see a change in the sport. I'm not sure that it's bad. It's just
different. Yeah. Well, so I'm curious about like the distance between training Army combatives and as that experience of working with people where you are training for lethality, you're training for like this isn't a win or lose situation, this is a life or death situation, and the distance between that training and training to win a professional fight. Because I would imagine that it is, and I would imagine that the psychology in the dynamic between preparing somebody to go fight in front of people where, you're testing yourself and you're developing yourself as a person. There's risk here, and that risk is unpredictable. But that is a different level of risk than the soldier is experiencing on the battlefield. So could you talk a little bit about the difference between those things?
Yeah, so I spent 20 years teaching special forces how to fight. And, there's guns, there's knives, there's dogs, there's pepper spray, there's chemical spray, there's tasers. There's all these different aspects to the fight that, you don't have in MMA. Okay.
Right.
Now, MMA and Jiu Jitsu is the fundamentals of the combatives program because, again, it's the safest that we can train, the closest to reality.
Right.
And I'll just use this as an example. So you have all these Krav Maga schools around the country, and nothing against Krav Maga. But I always bring my concealed carry with me whenever I go to any of those places. And I go, oh, yeah, you guys do gun disarms? And they're like, yeah. So I'll take my pistol out. I'll unload my pistol. I'll show them it's clear. I'll make sure that it's clear. I'll put I'll release the barrel, put it back in position, and then I'll put it in their face and show me your favorite gun disarm. And 9 times out of 10, those guys freeze because it's a real gun, even though it's not loaded.
Yes.
Because as much as you can train, every new iteration of training requires indoctrination.
Right.
Okay? So it's why with kids, we don't necessarily start them with leg locks, right?
Yeah.
Right.
We don't want them to be damaged as they grow. And it's why in judo, you can't do arm locks until you're 16 because we don't want them to be damaged. We want them to learn and grow and still be healthy. I know with jiu-jitsu, it's a little bit different, but we have these metrics in which we don't allow certain techniques at certain ranks. And then as you get exposure and as you get better and you can control yourself, then we add new complexity to the game. Well, so what we do in combatives is we do the same thing. We add guns, we add knives, we add dogs. We add complexity to the scenario in order to heighten your awareness of how at risk you really are. And so, for example, we have shock knives. They're taser knives. So you all of a sudden are now fighting with a taser knife that when it hits you, it's like, ah.
Yeah, right. Yes.
We fight. We did this where we brought in the canine units, and as guys were fighting, the dogs were getting let go on them.
Wow.
Now they were muzzled, so they couldn't hurt them. But listen, those dogs, the dogs we use in the military are very intimidating.
No doubt.
And then fighting with what we call blue barrel pistols. And so you actually get shot with a paint round, not a paintball round, a paint round that's traveling at 700 feet per second. That changes the dynamic. It changes your thought process. And all of a sudden, this idea that I can just with one hand hold the barrel and punch you and you, all of a sudden, all that stuff goes away because you don't want that. You want complete and total control of the weapon system that can do the most damage. Now, if you're good at jiu-jitsu, you come away from that scenario better than most people because you understand principles of body leverage and control. But if you don't, it's a rude awakening for you.
And that has to be when you're at the you're training special forces, that has to represent a new level of this type of experience, even for soldiers, right? And so when you talk about as an MMA fighter, you're there to challenge yourself and you grow into a certain type of person that you can't grow into without that challenge. As a soldier, although you are picking up skills, you're developing skills that will protect your life. I presume you're also growing as a person as well in that challenge. And I'm curious about the difference between those two things. Like, is it one long continuum of like the special forces training encourages people to grow beyond what they could have possibly imagined because the threats are so different? Or is it that they just grow in a very different way because not many human beings will be in those circumstances in their lives? Does that make sense as a question?
Bit of both. Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So number one, war, just like jiu-jitsu, is constantly evolving. If you look at jiu-jitsu in the 1970s, they didn't even have the triangle choke, right?
Yeah.
Professor Lucas?
Yeah, that's correct.
But we rediscovered it. In the 1990s, we didn't allow leg locks at all, but now leg locks are a part of the advanced divisions, right? In the early 2000s, everybody guard flopped, but now you have guys that are doing wrestling, doing judo, doing sambo, and have really, really good takedowns. Ryan Gordon, you look at his takedown game, it's really good, right?
Yeah,
might not be world-class wrestling, but it's really good. And so if he scores that takedown on you, you're in trouble right off the rip. And so just like in jiu-jitsu, war is always evolving. The war that we're fighting today is not the war that we fought in 2000. And the war that we're going to fight in 2030 is not the war we've been fighting for the last 10 or 15 years, right? So always this evolution that's taking place. And inside the special forces community, number one, that's less than 1% of the entire population of the military.
Right.
The military is less than 1% population of the United States.
Right.
So you're literally talking about people that are at like collegiate and professional level athletes. Yes. That's the comparison, right? So there is inherently in what they do as SF guys, this idea that they have to grow and mature and become a student. They have to do that with guns. They have to do that with language. They have to do that with fighting. So there is that, right? There's also, we don't know what the next threat is going to be until it becomes, right?
Right.
So the best that we can do is prepare with what we have for everything that we know. And so as we've been doing this war for the last 20 years against, Islamic terrorism and stuff like that, that's all been close up personal house to house combat, which lends to hand-to-hand combat because you're coming into a room that's less than 8 feet in diameter, right? So like very quickly you're in a hand-to-hand fight. So we've taken those things and we've made those a part of what we do because it's such a normal part of what we do now. So it's a little bit of both.
So in the psychological development of this person, right? We're talking about less than 1% of 1%. So we're talking about an elite group of human beings who, I mean, I don't know how many people you start with out of 100 to get to the 3 or 5 that make it through, whatever the right calculus of that is. The skill development is easy to describe, relatively speaking, right? Like fluency with guns, fluency with hand-to-hand combat, all of these kind of particular skills that we can put a label to. But I imagine that there's a psychological arc that somebody who, is not a special forces person achieves the privilege of becoming a part of the community and then lasts in that community for some length of time. Is there a way to talk about what changes happen in those people over time that is either typical or illustrative of like what goes on?
It's really about grit.
Okay.
It's about the people. It's just like an MMA fighting, right? You know that you're going to get punched in the face. You know that this is going to push you to your limit. And are you okay with that? And those are the people that are attracted to the SF community. They're people that just can get it done. And the mindset stays that way for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. Right. They're just a different breed of people. How many people quit before they get their blue belt?
Right. Yes.
It's just not easy, right?
Yes.
It's not hard, but it's not easy, And if you just stick with it, everybody could be a black belt. Even the most unathletic person in the world, if they just stuck with it,
right,
eventually the body will become more efficient and will learn and they'll pick it up. But man, those first 6 to 9 months are brutal because your ego is getting destroyed.
Right. For some of us, we're over 3 years and my ego is still obliterated on a daily thing. So,
but there's levels in that, right? So I'm sure Professor Lucas can speak to this as well. There's certain individuals inside the community where maybe you go to every IBJF tournament and you crush everybody's soul, but then you go roll. If you guys remember when they used to talk about Hickson, you go roll with Hickson and he treats you like an absolute school child and twists you up and makes you feel like you don't know anything about jiu-jitsu. And Robert Drysdale is another one like that. You roll with that, he just like freaking spanks you like you're a little kid. You're like, the hell have I been training 20 years for? Like, I feel like I know nothing, right? So I actually think that's one of the most attractive parts about jiu-jitsu is because really, if you truly understand jiu-jitsu, you should never be arrogant. Because there's always some person like Hickson or Robert Drysdale out there. And, and
it's usually the person that doesn't look as scary, right? It's not like someone ginormous and a lot of muscle. No, it's like,
look at how many people Megaton Diaz just crushed their soul, right? Yeah. You would not look at Megaton and go, I don't want to fight that guy. But like he made grown men cry in jiu-jitsu matches.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You just think about, and Hoist is another good example. I mean, obviously a dated example, but when you looked at Hoist, there was nothing really inherently that you should fear fighting that guy.
Oh, 100%.
Right? Yeah. You look at it now and you're like, oh, okay. So, I think it's that grit that you're never going to quit, that you're there for the long haul. And that you understand that this is a lifelong pursuit that changes that mentally.
Yeah. Well, as you have observed people, because you've done these things for, long stretches of time, as people, how shall I say it, mature as they age and their body changes what is natural to their capabilities. What have you observed in the folks that they develop this gritty mentality, this get it done, but then part of having to be athletic or be a soldier, I presume, like as you get older and your body's just different, like, do they get frustrated, or do they just see that as another part of accommodation? Okay, I have to do things differently than I did when I was 20, as
Again, so
opposed to
that's
when I'm over 50.
yeah, so that's a great thing about jujitsu, right? So like in when you're younger, you can rely on your athleticism, your endurance, your strength. But eventually all of us get to the age where those things start to leave. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have to adapt your game. Now, some of it is as we get older and we have injuries, I stopped rolling with 25-year-olds because I just simply don't care about that anymore. My back hurts, my arms hurt. And I pick guys like you, and I'm like, hey, are you good? Like, you're not a beginner, right? So we can have a good roll and just,
Right.
roll with each other, and you're not like
Sure.
trying to prove anything, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, eventually you have to get to that place, but it's the same as a soldier. So they're very accustomed to that.
Okay.
Because military breaks your body down because you're doing stuff that nobody can even believe.
Yeah.
25-mile road marches, operating in the mountains of Afghanistan,
Yes.
getting blown up by IEDs. And so
Yeah.
what
Goodness.
you can do as an 18-year-old, you can't do as a 40-year-old anymore. It just doesn't happen. And so what you see is in the jiu-jitsu room or the combatives rooms across the Army is you have these two categories of people roughly, where the older generation who's been around a while tends to pick older people to roll with, because
Right.
I still have to wake up tomorrow morning and go to work. So I
Sure.
prefer to roll with guys my age who are like, yeah, man, I don't have to prove how tough I am anymore. You know? Whereas the
Yeah. Yeah.
25-year-old is still trying to become the new lion. So,
Yeah. That's
Well,
true.
there's all of this kind of grit and determination. I mean, has a in the MMA world, in the soldiers world, the where to point that, I think, is obvious in a sense, right? Like, you're pointing it in the context of battle, you're pointing it in the context of protecting people. If you're in a MMA fight, you're pointing it in the context of winning. But those skills are super valuable outside of those contexts too.
hey,
And I would like for maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what it meant for you to take all of that determination into the world in a less physical way. As an
sure.
entrepreneur, you were not winning based on submissions or anything along those lines. You had a whole different set of problems to solve. So
Yeah.
how did those two things work together for you?
Yeah. So, there's a couple of different things here. And, this might be offensive to some, but they'll get over it.
Okay.
So you have two categories of people in the country, and you only have two. This is it. You have people that work for somebody else or people who work for themselves. That's it, right? There's no in between. You either own your own business and have employees, or you're an employee. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, as an employee, the lessons of jujitsu still apply. I still have to have the grit, the professionalism, the ability to evolve to the task, right?
Right.
The difference is that jujitsu ultimately starts to create independence, I think. Independence of thought. Professor Lucas, how many times have you heard a particular style or theory, but then as you've been practicing longer, I use this as an example, and not that it's maybe the best example, but for the longest time, Eddie Bravo's style of jiu-jitsu was really not accepted.
Yes.
Or the footlock,
Yes, 100%.
right?
Always seem like something like you said, mentioned at the beginning, like something dirty, and
Yeah,
it's more like hurtful than actual technique.
yep. And even like the Omoplata series, and now the very good sweeping series. But those things, I was around when those things were kind of frowned on,
Yeah.
But now that's not that way, right? So there's this independence that gets created inside jiu-jitsu, because Eddie Bravo style would never work for me because I'm a bigger guy. It's just not the way I play. But for Professor Lucas, that probably works out very well for him. And so there has to be this independence where he grows as an individual and finds his own unique flavor of the sport that we love.
Yes.
And mine is going to be different than his because I'm a different person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now in the business context, it's the same. If there's not independence, you get stuck in a rut and you don't grow, right? entrepreneurs cannot be stuck in a rut because they starve. There's no guaranteed base pay. There's no clocking in at 9 and clocking out at 5 and guaranteed to make X, Y, and Z, right? And so I think the grit and the determination it takes to be successful in MMA or SF or, Jiu-Jitsu is the same grit and determination it takes to be successful as an entrepreneur or somebody that wants to have the freedom to call their own shots, right? It doesn't mean I work less. As a matter of fact, I've oftentimes worked more than any of my friends that are in W-2, traditional roles.
Oh, I'm sure.
But it's just like Professor Lucas running his own school. We put in more hours than what most people do, but we do it because we love it.
100%.
And I get to call my shots. If I don't want to be in tonight, I can have one of my other black belts or one of my other brown belts teach. Right?
Was that evident to you from the beginning, Professor John? Like, so as you were developing that toughness, it seems like you were a young person as you started to explore both the world as a soldier, the world as a fighter. Was it evident to you as you were developing that grit then that, hey, I'm going to take this to my material prosperity life. I'm going to build businesses and I'm going to build a life that is going to be uniquely my own, and I'll build the level of prosperity that I decide I want to work against, right? Because there's always a calculation between effort and reward.
Yeah, my dad will tell you that I've always been the odd man out and did whatever I wanted from the beginning.
From the beginning, huh? Okay.
So, in my whole life, so I'm about to turn 51 here in the next, 30, 45 days, whatever it is. And so in 51 years of life, I've had 4 W-2s. Okay. The rest of my life, I've worked for myself. And those 4 W-2s one of them was the Army. One of them was when I worked at a restaurant as a kid. And then when I first got out of the Army, before I found out about the sales that I see now, I was working at a bookstore. So like the rest of the time of my life, I've been a business owner or a 1099 salesperson who set my own schedule, did my own time.
Yeah. When you think about which came first? Did the training, like, did you find that grit in the training, or was the grit always there and you took it through your life in all these different ways? Because that's there surely must have been times where you had to question, like, do I have X, do enough, whatever, because everything you're talking about.
I don't question.
So you didn't, self-doubt never entered the picture. You didn't have moments of that.
No, I can tell you, man. So I was crazy as a fighter. I mean, I was 165 pounds. I fought Jerry Bolander. Had no business fighting Jerry Bolander. And when people were like, why are you going to fight Jerry Bolander? My response was, everybody has a puncher's chance.
Okay.
Tell us who Jerry
Bolander is, because that's not a name familiar to all of us.
Yeah, so Jerry Bolander fought UFC 8, was one of the original Lion's Den guys, super tough guy.
Okay.
Was 220 when I fought him. I was like 170.
Wow. Yeah.
He had just won UFC 8 or 9 or whatever it was when I fought him.
Okay.
And like I fought Masafunaki for Pancras, who actually Shamrock. Yeah, I fought Masafunaki. And again, people are like, dude, you're going to lose. And I'm like, I'm not going to lose. Like I can win. I've just always call it delusional. It could be. I could be delusional. I don't know. I just always have believed in myself. And I just, so you have a choice. This is how I think about it. So, it's like the conversation of the optimist and the pessimist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can be optimistic and things not work out. You can be pessimistic and things not work out, right? It doesn't matter what side of that equation you're on. It's life. Sometimes things don't work out. But here's where I draw it. Who always feels better about life? The optimist or the pessimist?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Right? The optimist.
I like that way to think. Yeah.
Happier person. So why would you ever pick pessimism? Well, I don't want to be let down. Well, shit, it's life, man. Everybody gets let down. Like I have not been successful at every endeavor I've tried.
Right.
I wasn't even that super successful in fighting. Like I was a B level, maybe low A level guy. But man, I lived my life the way I wanted and I was happy with it. And I still live my life the way I want to, and I'm happy. So, I think that grit is something that can be developed. And I think it's something that you're also is innate. It takes a little bit of both.
Right.
I've never seen anybody that just naturally was the best at jiu-jitsu ever. It took grit and determination and the ability to not quit. But I've also seen people who came in and were very unsure who became really, really good because they just stuck with it. So I think
and other way around too, right, John? I have seen so many people like that. They're so almost like gifts physically, and they can have so much wins before their losses, and when they start losing, because it will come for all of us, they just give up, right? Because they never been on that position that challenging, and like struggling all the time, and then when it happens, they freak out.
Yeah. So I think that it's something that can be developed, and I also think that it's something that is natural too. So for example, why was it, and Professor Lucas could speak to this better than I can, but in the early days, everybody who came from Brazil was an absolute monster. And I can tell you why. Because they were poor and they struggled and they had to fight for everything they had. So when they saw the opportunity to come to America and make a life for themselves, they became world beaters.
Yeah, right. It was a different fire, right? That they need to have.
Right. So I think that suffering and struggle makes us the best that we can be. And, you look at some of the stuff happening in the States now, and there's been a long degree of prosperity for the jiu-jitsu community. And I think that that's affected some of the level and the fire and the desire of the younger upcoming people because they didn't have to struggle.
And now talking about a little bit of this, now they have much more options, right?
Yeah.
Because jiu-jitsu and the sports, MMA in general, became something so big, an industry. It's not only about fighting anymore. That you were mentioning on a millionaires MMA contracts, right? You never know that fighter essence because you don't know if they're playing a character, they're playing someone, or that's the way how they are.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, you think about this. When I was doing jiu-jitsu, we had 3 black belts in the entire state. How many black belts are in your city, Professor?
Oh yeah, you see like purple belts on that time. They were such a big deal.
Yeah. Right. Purple belts were the black belts of today.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my God, you have your purple belt?
So I still feel like that. Hold on, to go easy. I'm like, I hold those guys up, especially. Well, as a teacher, Professor John, like, do you have a story of maybe a really dramatic arc of someone you worked with that maybe didn't realize they had in them quite what they in fact had in them, and your instruction, jiu-jitsu or otherwise, brought out a better version of themselves?
I've got a couple. So the first one, I won't give his last name or the place in which it happened, but so he's one of my students. His name's Eric. Great guy. Was in another country, and the #1 bad guy on the watch list in that year was in front of him.
Oh my goodness.
He shot a double leg, took him down and choked him unconscious, and we saved a couple of 100 lives because he didn't shoot him and used jiu-jitsu instead. And that one holds really special significance for me, simply because it was an out of the box kind of way to think about combat, right?
Okay.
Like, this is the #1 bad guy in that region, and that guy had killed a lot of our friends. And instead of just shooting him, he actually captured him with the rear naked choke. So, and then I'll use another one.
Hey, Professor John, just on that particular thing. So the ability to capture that bad guy versus kill him at the moment, that yielded what positive,
hundreds of lives.
Hundreds of lives were saved because of being able to detain and keep this bad guy rather than just kill this bad guy outright. Okay. And those hundreds of lives get saved because, like, I'm trying to draw. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I understand now. So the fact that we capture this person, now we're able to learn things that we wouldn't have otherwise learned. And his ability to capture that person was purely dependent on his ability to kind of choke him out. And okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
So the other one is, the truth is despite how culture wants to frame this now, women are not as physically athletic and strong as men, right? And so at Fort Campbell, we had a very equality-based program. So we trained women just as much as we trained men. While I was training Special Forces, I had more female students participating in combatives than I think any other post. And I know that I'm the only one that's ever done this. We actually had our first female who beat a male in an MMA fight.
Wow.
And actually placed in the national combatives tournament, all Army combatives tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just really cool to see how technique can outwit pure strength and athleticism when other factors are relatively equal. And she was far more technical. She was a blue belt under us, and the other guy had not done any of that level of training. Now, it became really obvious how strength and speed makes a difference when you have men against women, but a good technical foundation can negate those as long as the stronger, more athletic person doesn't have that. Size always matters, but it can be negated. So that was a really cool story. And then he's actually in the Air Force now. I trained him as a 5 and 6 year old, and we were at a tournament, and it's one of my favorite stories ever. Jacare down in Atlanta, who I have a lot of respect for, just an old school, just a great guy. And it was my team. We were really rapidly scoring against them, just in the tournament, not them personally. And we got to the finals, and my kid was a green belt, had been doing judo and jiu-jitsu with me. And he was also a kid that just was a freaking absolute nail. This kid was just like, he would get on the mats and he would apologize to kids that he would have to kill them today. I mean, this is the kind of kid he was. And so the match starts, and Jacare comes running down the mat. Flop the guard, flop the guard. And my kid came out and threw a bone nagi and then armbarred his kid. And it was just, that kid now is well into his adult years, and he's now in Miami, and he's teaching jiu-jitsu in Miami, and right there outside the military post. I mean, it's just, there's so many stories when you spend time in the game, you actually get to see lives changed and lives saved.
Yes.
So, but it's my favorite because I got to watch Jacare panic, and we beat him in the thing. It was really awesome for me. we took that tournament. So,
John, do you have any story that I mean, I'm sure many, but any that you'd like to say, to tell us on seeing people's lives changing because your mentorship, and because of the martial arts, or even on the army? Anything that you'd like to share with us about that?
I won't share her name, but we have a female that was training with us that was she was raped, and she got really good. She got really good, and I watched that girl in her life change. She was a young woman in her 20s, started doing judo and jiu-jitsu, and just really became a different person, right? And she's really good now. She's like really good. She's moved on. Last time I checked, I think she was in Texas, and she's still training, right? So she's got to be a black belt by now, if she's not. But jiu-jitsu can help you overcome so many different things. None of us will ever understand that trauma.
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu will help with that trauma.
Yes.
And I'll tell you this, most of my military buddies, they use jiu-jitsu as therapy for PTS. It really does help.
Yes.
The state of mindlessness when we get to a place where we can flow, and like it's so automated, right? Like you get to that point where I trust you, you trust me, and we just let go. I'm telling you, that's some of the best therapy you can have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That notion of like, it's hard to find places in your life where the moment dominates your experience rather than your concern about the past or you worry about the future. You know, jiu-jitsu certainly requires a single point of focus in a way that not many other things offer to you. Well, Professor Lucas, as we kind of turn here to the end, anything else that you'd want to ask Professor John before we wrap
Uh,
up?
yeah. Well, Professor John, first of all, I have such a high level of respect for you, for everything that you do. It's really hard for me, like, when I have those people that they make speeches on coaching for life, 7 steps for success, whatever, but they never pass through anything on their life, right? So it's really hard to me to identify myself with them. And I mean, nothing against everyone, find your own
Sure.
thing, right? But seeing from everything that you pass, all your experience through the years, not only in the martial art world with judo, jiu-jitsu, MMA, but on your career, and see the way how you apply your knowledge in life and your mindset is really inspiring for real. And thank you so much for that. Thanks for sharing some things. I have just one curiosity here about the training that we talked on the beginning. Every time that I'm teaching, the last 10, 15 minutes of class, we do a little specific training, right? Training the topic of the technique of the week with
Sure.
more resistance, right? And let's try to have that other feeling, right? First, you teach your body how to move, you understand the steps, the concepts, and everything. Now, let's put some resistance involved. And some days I ask, guys, let's work 20, 30%. I want you guys being able to think through the movements and don't be just uh, muscle everything to accomplish your goal, right?
Yeah.
And usually this 20, 30% works until someone gets swept or they get pass, right? And then escalate. I'm curious to see on your training, on your 30% body shots and slap on the face, how that thing escalated and what you do when
All
that
the time.
happens.
All the time. And we just let it happen. It
You
happened
just
all
let
the
it
time.
happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because ultimately, it's two individuals who know what they're getting into. And if you want to amp it, then you know that the other guy's going to amp it, right? And ultimately, though, the best part about that is the more that they experience that, the less that they lose control.
It's interesting.
So, I'll throw this out because you brought this up, because it's something I haven't seen a lot of jiu-jitsu schools do. We do it in the Army. Have you ever trained with the lights out?
One time we did, yeah.
Yeah. There's something to be said for that. I know a lot of jiu-jitsu schools kind of go, what? And if you want your guys to relax, turn the lights out.
That's
Just let them
interesting.
feel. Just let them feel, right?
Yeah.
So it's a notion of like feeling your body in space without that visual cue. Is that what goes on?
Yep.
Yeah.
You have to really tone it back, because it's now not just about like me and Professor Lucas, right? There are other people in the room and I can't see them.
Oh, yes,
So
right,
in
right.
order for me to be safe and to protect my partner and to protect me, I have to slow down my game and I have to listen and feel.
Yeah, right.
I can't see.
That's nice. I like that.
Well, Professor John, you're totally in line with. There was a piece of writing that Professor Lucas wrote, well, probably like 18 months ago, and he talks about like the degree to which you're willing to be challenged is the degree to which you will transform yourself. And you have been an example, I think, of like somebody who's elected to be challenged. You put yourself in the position to find out, like, with these resistance, who can I become? And you did that both in the ring. You've done that, as a soldier and as a business person. So I'm with Professor Lucas. Admire your willingness to find out, like, well, who can I become? And I think people listening today will experience in that the same way we have. So thank you so much for spending time with us. And
it was great. Thanks. Great questions.
I appreciate that. And maybe you'll come back another time. We'll talk some more.
Anytime you want.
All right. Thank you.